Hey, it's me, and I just did that thing on the Sea Peoples, and kind of lost my train of thought. The video is about 15 minutes in when it crapped out on me. So I've come out here to do it in the freezing cold. If I can remember where I started from. Also, I want to say there's a lot of messages that I haven't gotten through. I turned violently ill about yesterday, and I kind of was not available. I know few people tried to call me, Dmitry, Ivan, Alyosha. Um, I believe my good friend from uh, Arizona is trying to contact me, somebody who I care very much about. Um, and I haven't seen her, or I haven't seen the response to the video read Yusuf's campaign, which I still need to see. I clicked on it a little bit and I heard, well, this might make Yusuf very mad and hate me. No, believe me, I'm not ever going to hate you or discuss it with you. But I like you enough as it is. I don't want to argue with you. If you have a complaint against me, I don't know. I'll check my inbox, but people have free speech. If they want to say stuff against me, that's fine. I'm not gonna like them any less about it. This is somebody who's been tremendously kind to me and who had given me tremendous gifts and was there for me during a horrible time in my life. So if they speak harshly against me, their opinion is valid, and I don't want to get into a fight with them. I don't even want to defend myself against it. What I want to talk about is one thing that I had always been taught in school, that the Roman gods were rip-offs of the Greek gods. And it took a while to try to think about this. I had bought into that too. And then I started kind of saying, well, no, they didn't know this and that. And people were like, what are you, stupid? But it was when I was paintings of kind of like the bad old gods, you know. And I painted a picture of Mot, of what Mot might look like, or because I knew Dagon was not a god of the sea. That was something from much later that I don't know if it was the Jews or the Orientalists or somebody, and I mean the Jews. I mean just of their artwork to show the pagan gods, not as if they're bowing down to them. The Jews wouldn't bow down to a pagan god. It'd be kind of self-defeating. But I had noticed something years ago after reading Ovid. And as a young kid, I had always loved the Greek gods. I always thought it was so cool. The Titans and, basically all the Olympian gods were swallowed by Zeus's father. I want to say Kronos, but Kronos almost sounds like a Mesopotamian god. Well, let's just use the Roman Saturn. So, and then Zeus, I think might have been Zeus's mother or whatever that made him swallow a stone, and they vomited up all of his brothers. No, Zeus made him put a stone in swaddling cloth and made him vomit up all his brothers and sisters, and then they kind of decided who would rule over what. And I'd always loved the stories of Persephone, Hercules, Odysseus, Jason, the Argonauts. When I got to high school, reading the the, Ilis- the Iliad and the Odyssey, I was always on the side of Hector. I thought Hector was totally correct. The Greeks were kind of just jerks. Ajax was an SOB. He was just a scumbag, sociopath. And the one guy who was awesome was Odysseus. He didn't want to fight. Lashing a cow to an ox, trying to make himself look insane until they put his son right in front of him. And so then he stopped and he said, all right. And then he was waiting around in the ship. He didn't want to fight, kind of like the ultimate pacifist. But something that you notice between the Greek gods and the Roman gods, I don't think they were borrowed from each other. I actually believe that the gods of the ancient world, especially the Mediterranean, even into the Middle East, were a similar pantheon. Because if we look at the Roman gods, let's take the three chief Roman gods, Jupiter, Mars, and Minerva. First one, Mars. Let's compare Mars to Aries. Now, Aries is kind of a bar fighter, a brawler. Someone who, kind of like the I'm fixing to get into a fight. And I believe the Ovid it's called the Ovid, I know, but it has a different title, and that's the author, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, whatever. Or the author is not Ovid, it's just that. The Roman gods are very cold and sterile. It's not the pagan gods were gods made in the man made God in their own image when they made the pagan gods. It wasn't like the monotheistic gods. It was who were distant, who were standing off, who what was good for the gods was not good for man, and the gods didn't act like man, and man was not to act like God. Not to mention that the gods were not the creators of anything. They may have assembled stuff, but they really didn't. They could be tricked. Their will could be bent. You could exact pity from them, things like this. So, Aries is kind of a brawler. He's kind of the god of bar fights, whereas Aries becomes the god of war, and the Roman gods become very stone-faced and not as playful as the Greek gods. And then you have the difference between Jove, Jove is the personal form of calling out to Jupiter, basically Jupiter, compared to Zeus. Zeus is very playful, always getting in trouble with his wives, always causing all these, this and that. Whereas Jupiter is almost resembles more of what the Roman Catholics might view as the Father. He's basically the one that watches over and directs, and is the king of, not necessarily like the king by election or the oldest brother, but just this is the God. This is the one that will banish any of the gods that disobey him. There's no overthrowing Zeus, even though Jupiter, even though he had overthrown the Titans, and actually became the god of the Titans. What about Minerva? Is Minerva borrowed from Greek gods? Now, many make a link between her and Pallas Athena. They link her to Athena because they say, her counterpart is Athena. And remember, counterpart does not mean derived from either. Because this is what, if you go to schools, at least if you did through when I was in school, they would just say, the Romans just borrowed their gods from the Greeks. Minerva was an Etruscan goddess. and really isn't Athena. The striking proof that they would say, "Oh, this is the obvious," is Apollo, because the one that carries the sun across the sky during the daytime is Apollo in Greece and Apollo in Rome. But what is the sun? The sun in for the Greeks is Helios. The sun for the Romans is Sol. Same word as in Spanish, it's Sol. And then later on, about 50 years before the Edict, or maybe 60 years before the Edict of Tolerance, we find that the chief god of Rome was known as the Sol Invictus, which had changed. It was Aries, and then it was Mithras right at the end, and then it turned to Christ, which the Christians were totally comfortable for this. In Daniel, Christ is called the Sun, S-U-N, of righteousness. Isaiah talks about the light will shine unto the Gentiles, and Christ was unconquerable. Death could not conquer him. Natural fit, Jesus becoming the Sol Invictus, which again I don't think is a paganism, because it was just a title. But let's look at the gods of Canaan. Even before, because you can look at the Egyptians and say, oh, well, Thoth became a mixture of Hermes and, or not of Hermes, Hermes, Mercury, and what's the other one? Well, he became Hermes Trismegistus, or I always call it Hermes Christmas Jesus, because sometimes it sounds like Christmagesus, or Trismegistus, which even then reminds me of the Mengistu government, the communist one after Haile Selassie in Ethiopia. And then we see gods like Mot, the god of the underworld, which looks a lot like Plato and Hades. Now, there have been many that have argued that Samson in the book of Judges is actually the Israelite form of Hercules. Some people argue no, this came from an earlier time, so that this was the spawn of the Hercules legend, and that Hercules was Samson. But it's funny, even when you go into the ancient India, not modern India, and sometimes modern India you can see the parallels, but ancient India, I realize that the Vedas, the Rig Veda, actually doesn't quite have an idea of reincarnation, and doesn't quite have an idea of it has an idea of a final going back to God, and many argue that it actually is monotheistic. But if you go just after that, you find gods that are looking very similar to these other gods. But what do we find? We find that English, Gujarati, and Urdu are extremely closely related to English, and that Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin are extremely close. They're from the same family branch. The one language that seems to stand out is Euskara, which is the language of the Basques, which has been a mystery for a long time. But these these Indo-European languages all have a common base. Even in Romania, Sfara, it's the same word as horse as it is for Sanskrit. So I don't know if there was borrowing from the Greeks, is that these people already had these gods. And even if you go to the Germanic gods, people consider Thor and Odin as to be Viking gods, but they're Germanic gods. These were gods the Germans had looked to since before the time of Julius Caesar. These are the same gods as the Anglo-Saxons. These are the same gods as the Lombards. Then hundreds of years later, the same gods as the Vikings. Many people put Odin not as a Zeus-type character, but as Hermes. And Thor not necessarily as a god of, they weren't perfect matches. Many people were trying to make them fit into the model that they had, but some of them don't fit. But there's a commonality of a pantheon of gods. And I think this stretches back to the same language family. Now, I could go into the different language families that they find, and I could say that there is a grain of truth in the Tower of Babel, that they're actually finding out what the ancient original language was, from Proto-Nostratic, and then the collection of Bantu languages in Africa, and in America they found something very shocking, that the Aleutic Eskimos have their own language family. There's a small language family around the Southwest, but from the Hudson Bay all the way down to southern Argentina, that's one language family, which used to be hotly contested for a long time. Even if you look at the number systems of Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, or even words like tooth. I mean, dant is tooth in Sanskrit. Well, if you speak Spanish, French, or Italian, dente is very close. So it's, and I'm not talking about genes. Obviously, yes, there's the Aryan invasion or whatever, which Hitler with it. I don't want people to think, oh, Aryan means Hitler, blonde hair, blue eyes, Nordic people. I'm talking about the movement of cultures. That's why I'm just like, oh, well, you think English are genetically inferior. No, I'm talking about cultural movements. I find this to be immensely interesting. I love history. I love ancient history. The periods of history, I think, that I dig are mainly the early Byzantine period, the Roman period, early Canaanite cultures, and just after the Long Dark, the rising up of that, like around 750 AD, when you get the Anglo-Saxons finally adopting some form of Christianity, Charles Martel, Charlemagne, this area. I also find early Islam very interesting. But you have to sift through evidence and weigh it out. And that's the problem that I have with people who say, well, this isn't true, then none of it's true. The Bible, has an astounding witness. Take away all the theology. Take away the miracles. It's the two things that historians look for are disinterested facts, and why people make such a big deal out of doing what's not obvious, or what's not exactly heroic. Why do they keep making a mention of this? And sometimes it takes decades for it to smack you in the face and you go, that's why. The one very strange language is Euskaric, which is what the Basques use, which they think is probably about 6,000 years old. So when I hear people just dismissing the Bible as, oh, it's just, you can't learn anything from there. Well, the one thing is that from a very ancient time, people knew that there was one language. Now they give the thing, oh, you know, the gods were, or God was scared that, you know, man would unite as one and take over the gods, so he scattered the languages. But if we look at it, languages seem to come back together. There seems to be a base language. So there is grains of truth. And the Bible is a wellspring for history, if not to just give us clues. Why are these people saying this? Why is it? What's going on? Why is this here? Even discovering who the sea peoples are, or why there was wandering for such a long period. Who thinks that, oh yeah, our people are the greatest and God helped us? So why do you have to wander around for 40 years? Well, God told us. Well, there must have been some type of wandering. Could it be that there was warfare in Canaan? And among these gods, again, my view had changed a while ago, but for a long time I was saying, oh yeah, the Romans, they just borrowed the Greek gods. Well, could it have been that through trade and transaction, these people already had a similar pantheon of gods? I mean, do we have any record of somebody saying, oh, you have Zeus, let's just change that to Jupiter, and Aries, let's just change that to Mars? I mean, the words don't even sound the same. Or Aphrodite, Venus. And if you look at the character of the Roman gods, they're much colder. They're not playful. They're not like a bunch of frat boys or teenagers always trying to have sex with people always just mad at them. These seem to be almost like immutable forces. Now, when I say paganism, I mean polytheism. I don't necessarily mean animism or anything like that. Because it wasn't exactly animism. These things like the oak groves, which were, hey, they were important to the ancient Israelites. Even the monotheistic ancient Israelites, they were important to them. They were also important to the Vikings. They were also important to the Romans. They were also important to the Greeks. Is this a commonality, or is this just, oh, it's just coincidence? I am somebody who very much doubts coincidence. It can happen, but if you find a pattern, it dispels coincidence. If anybody else has anything to add about the ancient gods or links between them, I mean, even when Plutarch was trying to figure out the Nordic gods, he said Woden was a form of Mercury because he was the god of dreams and the god of messages, but it wasn't a perfect match. Just because you don't have a perfect identical match doesn't mean that these don't come from the same group. I mean, look at Set. Set was a good god. Set was the god of the desert and the storms and the night. Well, when the worshippers of Horus became very powerful, he said, well, Set's the bad guy. And Set became the bad guy. He wasn't always the bad guy. You had Thoth, which when the Greeks came in, they turned him into Hermes Jesus, or Christmagistu, or I'll just say Hermes Christmas Jesus. That's a lot better. Hermes Christmas Jesus. But I would love to hear you guys' input on these ancient mythologies. It's something that I always loved from childhood. Which I know there might be some fundamentalist Christians out there saying, how dare you? But I must say I don't agree with the idea that El Elon, El Shaddai, Yahweh are different gods. If I were to say God Most High, or El Shaddai, or the Lord, or He Who Is, or Jesus Christ, or the Lamb of God, and you see these plastered all over the world, would you say, oh, well, that's polytheism, look at how many different gods they're talking about? No, they're talking about the same God. As if Madre de Dios and the Blessed Virgin Mary would be two different demigods who had born a god. And many of these gods may have come from actual human beings. We find Hadad and Chemosh, but before these are getting worshipped as gods in the heavens, we find that these are kings that are ruling cities. So ancestor worship and the pantheon of deities kind of blend. Did people, like the Rig Vedas show, this one god with just an afterlife? Did these great heroes of past wind up becoming the saints, and the saints wind up becoming the gods? We have something in modern time like this, and it's called Santeria Voodoo, where Saint Michael gets mixed with Saint Michael and Saint Anthony gets mixed with what's his name, John the High Conqueror, which gets mixed with this very Hercules-like story, and now he's a voodoo god. So it's very, if anybody has any input, I'd like to hear it. Peace to you, may God save Serbia and Syria. There's a lot of messages that I haven't gotten through. I turned violently ill about yesterday, and I kind of was not available. I know a few people tried to call me, Dimitri, Ivan, Alyosha. I believe my good friend from hey, it's me, and I just did that thing on the Sea Peoples, and kind of lost my train of thought. The video is about 15 minutes in when it crapped out on me. So I've come out here to do it in the freezing cold. If I can remember where I started from. Also, I want to say who had given me tremendous gifts and was there for me during a horrible time in my life. So if they speak harshly against me, their opinion is valid, and I don't want to get into a fight with them. I don't even want to defend myself against it. But what I want to talk about is one thing that I had always been taught in school, that the Roman gods of Arizona is trying to contact me, somebody who I care very much about. And I haven't seen her, or I haven't seen the response to the video read Yusuf's campaign, which I still need to see. I clicked on it a little bit, and I heard, well, this might make Yusuf very mad and hate me. No, believe me, I'm not ever going to hate you or be disgusted with you. But I like you enough as it is. I don't want to argue with you. If you have a complaint against me, I don't know. I'll check my inbox. But people have free speech. If they want to say stuff against me, that's fine. I'm not gonna like them any less about it. This is somebody who's been tremendously kind to me and who's